You know, for a story to be truly great, it has to contain certain characters. Pretty much every truly great story has a villain and a hero. Right? A protagonist and an antagonist. In every great story. And this past week, Joelle and I were at Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida. And if you go to this magical land of make-believe, you'll find something. And it is this: heroes and villains are always on display everywhere you turn at Walt Disney World. They're showcasing all their greatest movies and cartoons and everything that Disney has done. And it's about heroes and villains everywhere that you look. What makes a good villain? What makes a good villain in a story, do you think? It's audience participation time. What makes a good villain? How many of you have ever seen a Walt Disney movie in your life? Man, Disney movies, villains have certain characteristics. If you look at them over the course of the Disney series, have you ever noticed how they're always kind of dark and foreboding looking? They'll dress in black even sometimes. They have heavy makeup, or they have a certain mystique about them. Disney villains always look the part. They just look like bad people, right? It's obvious when you take a look at them. The difference in the movie The Lion King. Anybody remember The Lion King? Okay, well then The Lion King won. Okay, thank you, Charles. There's two major lions. There's the king, and then there's his evil brother. And the evil brother, his mane is very dark, and he has a little scar on his face. But the king, his mane is rich and colorful. Disney villains always look the part. They always do the same things. There's a process, a sequence that happens with every villain. They'll hatch an evil plot, and then they seek to have power over others, to take dominion over other people. They want earthly power. These things are part of the Disney villain. What about a hero? What about can anybody name a hero in a Disney movie? Nobody? No heroes? No Walt Disney fans in the room? This is shocking. Don't all of you have grandchildren? What about a prince in any of the fairy tale movies? From Snow White. He would be a hero, right? Heroes have certain characteristics too. A hero is strong. A hero is resolute. A hero is determined. A hero never wavers. Never wavers in their commitment to doing the right thing. And there's one other thing that's interesting about a hero that a villain never does. If only for a moment, in every Disney movie, a hero shows themselves to be vulnerable. You see their weakness. You see their humanity, their vulnerability is on display, always for a hero, and never really for a villain. So I want you to turn over your bulletin right now to the back, where you're going to find this morning's scripture passage from Luke's Gospel, the compass that's going to guide the rest of our discussion this morning, as well as a place to take notes. I want you to turn that over and set it on top of your hymnal in front of you. Okay? Just set it on top of your hymnal in front of you. And then I want you to just listen. I want you to listen very carefully. Listen very carefully to this story that's found in the 18th chapter of the Gospel according to Luke. Jesus told this parable to certain people who had convinced themselves that they were righteous and who looked on everyone else with disgust. Two people went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed about himself with these words: God, I thank you that I'm not like everyone else. Crooks, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector over here. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of everything I receive. But the tax collector, he stood back at a distance. He wouldn't even lift his eyes to look toward heaven. Rather, he struck his chest and said, God, show mercy to me, a sinner. I tell you, this person went down to his home justified rather than the Pharisee. All who lift themselves up will be brought low, and those who make themselves low will be lifted up. Now, on the back of your bulletin, which I invited you to turn to, I'd like you to write down answers to 2 questions. Okay, I want you to take a pencil and write a number 1 and a number 2 below that. Number 1 and number 2 on your bulletin. And then I want you to answer questions 1 and 2. Here's question number 1. Who is the villain in this parable? Who is the villain in this parable? Write your answer for number 1. Who is the villain in this parable? And second, who is the hero in this parable? Who is the hero in this story? So number 1 is who is the villain, and number 2 is who is the hero in the story you just heard from the 18th chapter of Luke's Gospel. All of us are pretty familiar with this parable. We've heard it a lot before because it's short and it's easy to remember. And maybe those reasons alone are why this parable is so well known and frequently preached on by ministers. But as you just heard the story again, and I asked you then to write down the villain in the parable and the hero in the parable, I have a question for anyone who's willing to answer. Who is your villain? The Pharisee, right? The Pharisee. That seems quite obvious to us, doesn't it? Quite obvious. The Pharisee, the one who stands proudly before God, grateful that God has made him to be better than everybody else. He's prideful. He is arrogant. He is everything that a good Christian today knows we're not supposed to be, right? But the thing is this, for those who would have heard this story in Jesus' day in person when he told this parable, our answer to that question would have made absolutely no sense to them. They would entirely disagree with you. Entirely. Because there's more to this Pharisee than the one dimension we see. See, this Pharisee is probably an honorable and decent man. This Pharisee is a religious leader in his own community. He's well respected by others, and there's good reason for that. He's knowledgeable in the law. He's knowledgeable in the things that the Jews are supposed to know and do and live. And he lives out his faith on display for others to see in an active way. This Pharisee is living proof that the laws which God handed down to Moses at Sinai can be lived out fully by all of God's people without exception. This man is acutely devout. He fasts with frequency. In Jesus' day, all Jews were required to fast once every year on what is called the Day of Atonement. Every Jew would fast on this day. It was required by the law, and that was it. But this Pharisee, he fasts twice every week. So dedicated is his devotion to living out his faith. In Jesus' day, every Jew was required to pay a tithe of 1/10 of the produce of their land to a tribe called the Levites. The Levites were set apart, one of the 12 tribes of Israel who were set apart among the people and were responsible for acting as police officers, judges, civic leaders, and teachers in their community. This was their job. They were civil servants. And since the Levites served their nation in these capacities, they had no means of working other jobs or collecting a stable income. So all of the people would tithe of their food to make sure that the Levites were well provided for. This was what God commanded according to the law. But this Pharisee went over and above what was required of him according to the law. He gave a full 10% tithe of everything that he had. Everything. To those among his people who were needy. So generous was this Pharisee. Do these acts sound like the acts of a villain to you? Does generosity sound like something a villain would do? Do you think? No. Generous and villain don't tend to go together, do they? Does devotion to something larger than yourself sound like something a villain would do? No. So question number 2. Who is the hero of this story? Who did you write down in your bulletin? Who is the hero of this story? Somebody said the Pharisee was the hero. Who was the hero?
Both of them.
Both of them were the hero. Well, let's take a look at the other character. Let's take a look at the tax collector. The tax collector, he kneels down. He kneels down far back away from the place of prayer at the temple. They both went up to the temple to pray. The Pharisee comes up to the front of the place of prayer, and the tax collector stands back over here in the corner, and he kneels down. And he won't even look up toward heaven. He looks down and he beats his chest as he prays. And all of this is for good reason. There's good reason for this. In Jesus' day, tax collectors, their job worked like this. They would buy a geographic territory from Rome. They would buy a section of land from Rome, like say buying a franchise of a business. Okay, they bought a territory. And then every year, they were required to collect and send to Rome a certain amount of predetermined tax revenue from their territory that they would collect. Rome would assign a number, and they would have to collect enough money to send that to Rome so that the Roman government could carry out its work. And they did this as a for-profit enterprise. They didn't just collect the taxes for Rome and go on their way. I mean, after all, they had made an investment. They had to buy the land from Rome to begin with, so they had a debt to pay off probably, right? It's like a mortgage. They had bought this land from Rome, and so they needed to recover their purchase price, and then they needed to eat, right? They needed to provide a steady source of income for their home and family too, so what did they do? They charged additional fees on top of what was required of them by Rome to collect. And oftentimes, instead of charging a small amount, let's say a usage fee, for example, the tax collector would double or triple the amount of tax that was owed by every adult male citizen in their territory. They would double it or they would triple it. Rome would get their cut and they would get the rest. And this practice made the average tax collector both incredibly wealthy and immeasurably despised. Tax collectors were turncoats and traitors in their own communities because of the service they provided to the Roman Empire. Is this man a hero? Or is this man a villain? He's stealing from his own people to make himself rich. That's what he does for a living. Is he a hero or a villain? I think about these two characters, and I think about our own lives, and it's easy for us to condemn righteous indignation like that of the Pharisee when we see it in other people, isn't it? It's easy for us to look upon someone like the Pharisee or even the tax collector with pity and say to ourselves, wow, they just don't get it. And in the parable, we quickly gravitate typically to whose side? Who's the one that we're pointing towards of these two, the Pharisee or the tax collector? Who do we lean toward? We lean toward the tax collector, don't we? We lean toward the tax collector typically, because if you just read the story on the surface and don't think much about it, that's where you're being sent. That's where Jesus wants us to look. But if you think about it, the descriptions I've given you, Pharisee and tax collector, right? The Pharisee who lives probably a decent, upright life for the most part and tries to stick to the law and do what a good Jew is supposed to do. The tax collector who steals from his own people to make his living. Which one of these looks more like you? Which one of these looks more like you? Are you a person who deceives and defrauds others for personal gain, but does feel guilty about it, like the tax collector? Or are you more like the Pharisee? Do you try your level best to live an upright life, doing good where you can, giving help when you can, and sometimes falling into the trap of comparing your own good deeds against those of the people around you? Which one are you? Pharisee or tax collector? Maybe sometimes there's a little of both. Maybe sometimes we lean more one way than we do the other. But here's the thing. Either way, we're all sinners. Either way. We're all sinners. You're a sinner, I am a sinner. All of us. That Pharisee and that tax collector, both sinners. Neither of these two characters is a hero. This story on the surface has no hero. Both of them are villains. And both represent the human condition. Something broken that lives inside of all of us. We are the tax collector sometimes, and sometimes we are the Pharisee. I was talking to someone a few weeks ago who said to me, you know, we need more young people in the church. We need more young people. And I said, great, what are you willing to do to get those young people to come to church? And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, what about a drum set and guitars? Are you willing to have a drum set and guitars in the worship service to get young people to come? What about videos as part of the sermon? Or what if they were able to tweet questions to the pulpit during the sermon and I was to respond to them right here on the spot while talking to you like I do? Would that be something you'd be cool with? And they looked at me and they said, well, why would we do that? That's not how we worship. We worship this way. So we need them to come and worship our way. We think so often that the world would, if the world would just be more like us, if they would come to church and share in the good things that we have, then everything would be all right. God would smile upon them just as God has smiled upon us. But here's the thing. The Apostle Paul writes that all have sinned and all have fallen short of the glory of God. Whether we stand before the altar or we kneel within the darkest corners and recesses of our hearts, we're all the same. We've all sinned. We all sin. And we all continue to fall short of the glory of God. The real question of the story then is, what can be done about it? What can be done about it? What can we do about it? And the answer to the question lies down there on the table. It's right there on the table before your eyes. Right now. It's the bread and wine that sits upon God's table this morning. Because God has done something about it. God has done something about it for us. And we can receive the gift that God offers to us. We can taste for ourselves His mercy and grace. But how will you approach the table today? Will you approach the table like a Pharisee? Will you come confident, in control of yourself and your life and your decisions? Will you come secure in your place in the kingdom of God? Or will you approach the table this morning like that tax collector? Will you confess your sin before God this day and humbly ask His mercy? Will you acknowledge the depth and the breadth of your own sin this morning? Jesus shows us in this parable that one must ask forgiveness. One must ask forgiveness in order to be forgiven. He says we must repent in order that we ourselves hear again the good news that Christ died for us while we were yet sinners. And this proves God's love for us. Who is the hero of this story? Who is the hero of our story? Jesus is the hero. God is the hero of this story, of our story, through the gracious outpouring of His love in the person and work of God's Son, Jesus Christ, and the power of the Holy Spirit that has been placed in your heart and my heart and our minds to guide our steps and to lead us home. We cannot achieve holiness or righteousness in and of ourselves. Our way is not the right way. God's way is the right way. And we can only pray to be given the discernment to begin to understand what that is. And we must confess our sin and ask forgiveness. We must do it when we come to God's table. As Jesus says, all who lift themselves up will be brought low, and those who make themselves low will be